I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange.
Hey there, spooky nerds, and welcome back to Talking Strange, a paranormal pop culture show. I'm Aaron Sagers, and my guest for this episode, he's been on Talking Strange before. I've said in the past, he's one of those people that I love getting to know, even though I probably should have known him a long time ago because we moved in similar circles. But here we are now. His latest book, The Talking Dead, a collection of messages from beyond the veil, 1850s to 1920, is now out. And in The Talking Dead, he invites readers to eavesdrop on the afterlife and learn what 19th and early 20th century mediums had to say about the spirit world. He's also the author of Chasing Ghosts, a tour of our fascination with spirits and the supernatural. And he has curated really an extraordinary anthology of messages allegedly dictated by spirits during the height of spiritualism, and also runs the Curious Publications publishing house, and which is great, and we'll get into that as well because it's a way of supporting independently run authors and publishers, because sometimes the big boys are a little bit hard to deal with. That's me saying it. That's not him. He is Marc Hartzman. And Mark, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aaron. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I have The Talking Dead right here, and uh, you know, I love this book because I've done a lot of time researching these mediumship messages, and researching the history of spiritualism and this era that kind of emerged during Victorian times and post-Civil War, leading up into World War One. But what you have is you've got so many words on the page, so many messages that I have not seen, and it's an incredible collection. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of what's inside the pages, I'm curious about the research process on this and assembling all of this stuff, because it seems like you would have had to do uh, quite a bit of work pulling all this together beyond just looking at public domain publications and whatnot. It seems like a lot of legwork is involved.
Yeah, well, it started in a couple of ways. One was started actually as research for Chasing Ghosts when I was researching the history of spiritualism and finding what these different mediums were doing and what they were transcribing from different spirits, as you said, allegedly giving these messages. And so I was pulling together some of that information for that book. But at the same time, kind of what led to Chasing Ghosts was me collecting books on spiritualism. And so I have a bunch of these. I actually brought a few of them over here. I can show on screen in a second, but we'll show and tell. But I love these old books, and what's inside them is just, these amazing messages, again, supposedly from these spirits. So I thought, well, maybe as a separate project from Chasing Ghosts, which is talking about the history and setting up context, what if I just actually pull and collect a bunch of these different messages supposedly straight from the spirits, and finding a variety of them. So some of them, for example, one of them, this is a book I love. It's called The Next World Interviewed. I mean, how great a title is that?
Yeah.
And so this is from, late 1800s, and the author here, you can see it's from 1896, and the author just goes through all these different people that it supposedly got messages from. And some of these are, luminaries of the time. Some of them I think are just, people we probably don't know much about anymore, but like Prince Albert is in here. Benjamin Franklin is in here. I recorded a few of the aphorisms he gave from the afterlife in The Talking Dead. But I mean, here's, Ben Franklin giving just like, this is what he did in life. Now he's doing the same thing in the afterlife, but with a spiritual twist to it. And so I just thought going through these books and presenting some of the more interesting messages in them would be a really, wonderful book to compile together. So that's what became The Talking Dead. Um, I've also got Phineas Speaks. This is one from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, and he was a huge spiritualist.
Hmm.
Your viewers may know about that. He was a huge evangelist. He lectured across Europe and across America. He believed he met his son through a medium, and that really convinced him this was real. And then he believed he was in contact with the spirit Phineas from, a couple thousand years ago, and was getting all this advice in life. He and his wife were taking advice from the spirit, and it's all recorded in this book. So there's a few passages from that as well. One of my favorites is uh, a couple chapters I recorded from a book that Mark Twain's ghost allegedly wrote. So I have a section in the book called Afterlives of the Rich and Famous, or After Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. So a few celebrities who I found posthumous messages from. So Jap Heron is a book. You can see it says a novel written from the Ouija board. So this is a whole book that he wrote through a medium, through her Ouija board, which I just found fascinating. This was, I think, about 10 years after he passed away.
Yeah.
And there's a whole story about how the publisher was upset about this because the publisher owned all rights to Mark Twain's works, but this was Mark Twain's ghost. So was it really Mark Twain's works? Or, there's debate about that. And ultimately, there was a lawsuit and they agreed to stop publishing and get rid of the books. Obviously, a few of them remained, as I just showed you one of them. But, it's all kinds of fascinating stories like this that I loved. And it was, for me, something I wanted to be able to share beyond what I could share in Chasing Ghosts.
Yeah. And I want to get to the celebrity messages in a bit, but I want to stick with sort of the research component for a minute because I think so there were so many publications, periodicals dedicated to spiritualism, to mediumship, everything from talking to mediums, but also how to do it at home yourself, how to become a better
Yes.
medium or how to make use of this technology of talking boards and Ouija boards, and some of that stuff, I mean, like you can go through the Library of Congress and then you can find collectors that have these, or there's certain spiritist societies that still exist that have some of these, but some of them are very rare, hard to find. And obviously you have some examples right there. Was there any kind of holy grail type of thing that you were able to lock onto that just really blew your mind?
There's a great online resource. I'm forgetting the correct abbreviation for it, but it's basically a internet archive of spiritualist publications. And so you can go into that and just search different terms or people
Hmm.
and see what it pulls up. So that gives you, thousands of scanned pages, PDFs of publications like the Banner and Light and the Medium and Daybreak, these spiritualist papers from around that Victorian era. And so I was scouring through some of those and a few other, occult type of magazines and publications from around that same era. And that's where I could start to find, there's a lot there. So I'm kind of scouring through, scanning articles, seeing what might be interesting, and trying to find the ones where it was actually recording a message from a spirit versus talking about their seances or talking about um, messages. I didn't want it to be from their voice. I wanted it to be the actual voice of the spirit. So that was kind of my criteria. And then finding something that seemed a little bit interesting and different from other things I collected. So that was an amazing resource. I mean, for anyone interested in spiritualism, it's a wealth of information there. But that's where I could look up. I think I have an interview with Mark Twain from an occult publication, and I probably just looked up Mark Twain
Hmm.
and it's would see what would come up, and then you find, okay, here's actually an interview with his spirit. Let me go through that and excerpt whatever I want to from that particular publication, and it's all public domain.
Yeah. And, and when we're talking about even just the spiritualist movement and these periodicals and documents and whatnot, it's, I mean, you're kind of focusing on a lot of the spiritualists, but it's kind of worth noting that within the movement itself, it's not like there was, I mean, Conan Doyle wrote a history of spiritualism, if I recall, but
Yes.
there's not like canonical works. We have uh, help me out with the name, Andrew Jefferson Scott, or
Andrew. Jackson Davis.
Jackson Davis. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I knew it was
Yeah.
it's either like a assassin or the three. You know him by three names, all three names. But
Right.
yeah,
Right.
and I mean he was kind of the closest to sort of in writing down sort of the rule book or having an organized body, but it didn't really have an organized body of beliefs and practices. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was pretty early.
Yeah.
He preceded the Fox sisters
Right.
by a few years. But yeah, really, it was. I mean, there's really a ton of books on it from that era, from various spiritualist mediums who were writing. A lot of mediums who were writing their experiences, but then also people like Doyle who were recounting experiences with them. And then you have the other aspect of it, which is the scientific researchers who
Hmm.
are investigating these mediums and then recording their experiences and observations in books. And oftentimes we're very fooled by these mediums. A lot of times it was, I would say that a good majority of the mediums were women. And at that time, that was a great job for a woman. There weren't a lot of jobs going on. They were, generally speaking, they were going to be a housewife, right? And there weren't a lot of opportunities at that time. And so if they could speak to the dead, that really elevated them. That gave them, real status in their community. So scientists wanted to study them, and I think that there was this mindset of the scientists that they couldn't be fooled by a woman, right? Like these learned men, these geniuses, they couldn't be fooled. So something must be going on. And of course, in thinking that, they were clearly fooled. There's lots of cases of that. So, a lot of them are writing about their different experiences. I have another book about a medium named Eva C, um, who was in France, and the guy who wrote this, I mean, this book has tons of photographs of the ectoplasm she was manifesting, and I mean, it's amazing the stuff that was going on, and he bought all of it. Thought everything here was legitimate. So that's another fascinating aspect to me is just the amount of belief that went into this, and what it must have been like at that time. To so for so many people beyond scientists too. I mean, obviously there were millions of people who believed that this was all real, and I'm not saying that none of this could be real, by the way. There's certainly a possibility that there's some aspect of communicating with spirits or some sort of afterlife. But for the most part, this was a lot of people, fraudulent mediums who were capitalizing on death. And I think you mentioned earlier that, this was kind of hit a peak after the Civil War. So you have so much death, so much bereavement. So people were grasping for anything. Like if they had a chance to speak with their lost loved ones, they were going to cling to that hope. And then the same thing happened after World War One. So you
Yeah.
do have these moments of people really taking advantage of that kind of grief. But it's a fascinating time to think that a lot of people really believe that this was a part of our life, was an afterlife that we could still connect with loved ones and we could have that communication continuing. And that must have brought a lot of comfort, for people who believed it and never knew otherwise, that this was a fraud.
Yeah. I mean
So for better or for worse.
that extends to Arthur Conan Doyle himself. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
he was a learned man. He was, a man of science and yet also a man who had suffered tragedy and had a need for belief to the point that perhaps it obscured his own logic.
Yeah.
And he fell for some scams and maybe he was part of some legit stuff, but he was also, he was duped. Uh,
Yeah, my favorite with him was when he got duped by the teenage girls who said they saw fairies. And then he wrote
right.
the book, The Coming of the Fairies, and really believed that they saw fairies out in the woods, and that they couldn't have possibly faked this, or how could two young girls, deceive anybody, right? Um, so that's pretty amusing. He also famously butted heads with Houdini, and Houdini's like, "This is not real." And Doyle said, "It is real. In fact, I think you have spiritualist powers." And Houdini says, "I promise you, I don't.
I
I
love
can
that,
tell you
but
what I'm doing is not anything, with spirits."
I love them. I mean, I love the whole Houdini Arthur Conan Doyle frenemy, ship because they were friends, but also, had a falling out. But as far as that, kind of the best last word is after Houdini's death. Arthur Conan Doyle saying like, well, actually, I think yeah, he had abilities himself and was so powerful that he was actually blocking the mediums that he was debunking. So that's why their abilities were never able to come through. So
Yeah, there were always excuses,
yeah,
which I find amazing. And there was another researcher, Hereward Carrington. Are you familiar with him?
yeah,
So I have a bunch of his books. I'm fascinated by that guy. And he seemed to be sort of, kind of going both sides a lot, But he really believed in a medium named Eusapia Palladino, an Italian medium, and brought her to the United States, and lots of scientists were studying her. And his excuse was like, well, look, she's performing all the time, and you can't always expect spirits to just come when you're asking them to come, right? So she's got to put on the show, and so she has to cheat sometimes to put on the show. She's going to cheat a little bit. So so there was always like that kind of thing, like, well, I had to fake it this time because I want to give everybody a show, and they can't always come. Or like you said, it could also be, well, the energy in here is not conducive to spirits, so they're not coming tonight, so
yeah.
nothing's working.
Even to the point that I don't want to get too far off topic, but because I do love talking about this, but Mina Crandon, or a big Arthur Conan Doyle was a big booster of hers, and
Yes.
she was producing ectoplasm out of orify, removing it from bodily orifices.
Yep. Like
So
Eva.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so I mean, this was a time where our perceptions of ghosts very much, obviously these stories of ghostly encounters and messages from the dead, date back to the beginning of really human history of the written word, but really solidified in sort of a way that still is with us to this day. I would say we are very
Sure.
much shaped by the spiritualist movement now in our ideas about the paranormal. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's sure it's still here. People
Yeah.
still want to believe, and of course,
So
yeah.
within that, when you're looking at these messages for the Talking Dead, what were what were some of the more striking interactions, messages that you happen upon that beyond just okay, yeah, here's a medium that is getting a little preachy, or I don't even want to get to the celebrities yet, but just like anything that you read where you're like, okay, well that's kind of, it strikes me more than some of these other messages because it just feels a little bit more, I don't want to say solid, but impactful.
Well, I would say, I mean, one thing I was trying to find was stuff that didn't feel, first of all, a lot of preachy stuff, as you
Yeah,
mentioned. Um, I wanted to try to find some messages that did offer some sort of description of the afterlife, because you'd think if you could speak to someone from the dead, you'd want to know what it's like over there.
yeah,
And a lot of times that stuff was just very vague,
yeah.
like it's the light is wonderful, like just stuff that's really telling you nothing. So I tried to find some fun bits and pieces. So the first section is teach spirit teachings, basically just random spirits, no one of any notes or anything like that. And so they gave some interesting descriptions, which I thought were kind of fun. One of them I thought was a bit amusing, was the fact that there's no football, there's no baseball or no tennis, but what we have is so much better, so you're not going to miss the earthly games that entertain you. What we have here is far superior. Um, the schools are much more superior. The things that we're able to learn in the afterlife are so far beyond it. In fact, most of the great inventions on Earth came from spirits telling the inventors how to make them, because we're so much more learned here. So trying to show the origination of ideas on Earth were coming from the spirit land. And then just little details like, clothing, for example. When you get here, you come in a white robe, and then you can basically choose whatever colors you want to wear, and it's all up to your mind, and we all communicate through telepathy, and we trade knowledge and wisdom, and just all these different little aspects. We don't sleep. There's lots of Q&A basically. Actually have a section of FAQs with just interview, finding out what things are like. So I thought it was interesting to hear these descriptions of what the spirits were saying, or what the mediums at least were imagining that the afterlife was like.
It's a little bit of breaking the rules as far as what you would assume Okay, so like the section where you're talking about the gowns and everything, I like that a lot because when they're like, yeah, okay, you show up in this way, but yeah, you could choose to wear different colors or whatnot. Or there's a passage where it's talking about visiting hell, but it's not so much the fire and brimstone inferno hell, but more of a place that you exist in your own mind, if I recall. Like it's not
Yeah,
necessarily dealing with a biblical Satan. It's
right.
it's a your own journey, which speaks to
Which
sort of
feels
the yeah,
it feels a bit Swedenborgian.
yeah.
Emanuel Swedenborg kind of described that same sort of hell in his book, Heaven and Hell, I think is what it's called. Um, but yeah, basically, it's not the big, fiery hell with devils poking and prodding, but yeah, more of you living amongst your own problems. So I thought, yeah, that was another interesting insight and a different perspective to look at, what our lives are like and how they may affect us later. Assuming
And
that we move on after this.
speaks to the evolution of the spirit on the other side. So that as you said, like, we may not have sports, but what we're doing is so great, or our schools are so great that there's a continual growth taking place on the other side. So it's not like boom, you're just in heaven and it's all good. You're still on your own journey on that other side, and that very much comes through with these messages that we're seeing in the book and reflective of a lot of the spiritualist philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It talks about how the soul, basically, once the soul is free of, as it describes it, like our fleshy bodies, right? Then we're even more advanced. Like now we don't need this anymore, and we can evolve and grow even greater. And for that reason, we don't need food. That spirits talk about not needing food or drink. They basically sound like breatharians. They're just sort of inhaling, this sort of air that gives them the nutrients that the soul needs, basically, which maybe is more about wisdom and intellect, as they go on in relationships and trying to um, correct things that maybe did wrong on Earth.
But you got to stay hydrated. This is a distinct message, and I forget which medium this is coming from or who their spirit guide was, but a specific note, a tip from the other side that you have to stay hydrated, not only in life, but it's even necessary in the afterlife to stay hydrated, and that will even allow you to communicate with the other side better, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I love that
But
one.
that
Like,
that
that's
reminds me of
practical
another.
advice.
It reminds me of another point, which could negate everything that we've just talked about, because it talks about the lying spirits as well, and how
Mm,
there's lots of prankster spirits. So you might get a spirit that's just joking around with the medium. So if that's the case, all these things we're talking about, these descriptions, could all be, a joke, a
yeah.
prank from some spirit, or those supposed celebrities, the Edgar Allan Poes and the Mark Twains and Shakespeare's and so forth. For all we know, or for all the spirits or the mediums know, that could have been a lying spirit just playing a joke on that medium. Of course, they do try to say, "How do I really know it's you?" Trying to, um, confirm that it is indeed that spirit. But again, who knows? So I thought that was an interesting revelation that over here we still have a bunch of jokers and people, spirits who will prank mediums, which almost
Well,
feels like an out.
yeah, I know. And when you're getting into these the spirit messages from these celebrities. So we have Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Ben Franklin. So, founding fathers, but and then Edgar Allan Poe, William Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, Washington Irving. So there's a wide swath of people that are coming back and communicating in theory. What were some of the messages that you you read? You were like, okay, that actually kind of sounds like potentially that person on the other side, enough that you weren't ready to dismiss it outright.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. Is a lot of these things, they're well written. It's not like it's garbage all of a sudden. Although I will say that Mark Twain's book I showed earlier, Jeff Heron, was panned by the critics. There were actual reviews in the New York Times about it and other publications,
Right,
and they
where
didn't
they
like it at all.
refer to him as quote unquote as quotation mark Twain.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
this is the best thing Mark Twain can produce in death, it kind of let sleeping dogs lie.
It's yeah. Maybe he needs to move on and try something new in the afterlife, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had some harsh words for him, which I thought was funny. But I mean, some of the Shakespeare for his 300th anniversary of his death wrote Hamlet in Heaven, and it's it's kind of I just reprinted I think a couple pieces of that play, but a couple acts of it. But it's entertaining. It's kind of fun. It's Hamlet basically waking up in heaven and not realizing he's dead at first, and then finding out he's dead, and then finds his father, and basically is discovering the afterlife for himself. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Some of the Benjamin Franklin aphorisms I thought were pretty fun. I noted one of them here. I thought this was, again, he's always now he's kind of skewed toward the spiritualist message. And like you said earlier, again, a lot of this stuff is very preachy. But here he says, one of our scientific friends is, oh, wait, oh, sorry, that was Mark Twain. Benjamin Franklin, he said, it has taken 100 years to develop the electric telegraph. Give us 100 years to develop our spirit mediums. So here's sort of in his kind of aphorism type language, but trying to make people understand that this isn't perfect yet and giving a reasonable explanation for why that might be the case. And then I thought this was kind of fun. Spiritual knowledge, like gems hidden in the bowels of the earth, is only to be reached by patient upturning of the soil. So again, like these things take some time and some devotion. Another thing I thought was kind of fun from the celebrities was Edgar Allan Poe. And
Hmm.
again, this another preachy thing, but he basically confesses that he was very dark in life, and that he was, a bit of a drunk, and so he wrote all these dark things. And now that he was in the afterlife and he understood, he saw the light and he was lifted up by the spirits, and he advises everyone to not drink rum and to follow God, and life will be much brighter than it was for him in his darkness of all the dark writings he wrote, almost like atoning and regretting his life, which I thought was kind of entertaining. And again, the obvious, to me, the spirit medium just trying to steer people the right direction through the words of Edgar Allan Poe,
Yeah,
supposedly.
it's very woe is me or Poe is me, I guess. It
Yeah.
gets
Yeah.
yeah, he lost me on the don't drink rum. But I was reading that and I was like, yeah, this is very much the opposite of the Poe. But
Yeah.
meanwhile, then the the Oscar Wilde communications, I won't say it's necessarily on the same level of wit, but it kind of gets close to
Yeah.
okay, it's either legit, so we take it on face value, or it was someone that seemed pretty well read about Oscar Wilde. He's throwing shade towards James Joyce.
Yeah.
He's sounding very snarky, throwing some side eye from the other side eye. Uh that one actually I liked because I was like, okay, this I like the tone here.
Yeah. I like the term other side eye, by the way, but um, yeah, I thought that was pretty amusing. He was really trashing James Joyce. He had some good language, calling it, vomit, and he was pretty colorful in his distaste for Ulysses and his critique of some of the other contemporary writers, which I did think was pretty amusing. I was excited to find that one.
Lincoln during his during his life, obviously Mary Todd was fascinated with the other side because she had suffered loss of two boys, right? And then held seances in the White House. Some people speculate that Lincoln may have attended some, and then one of the most famous photographs that came out of the era was, the supposed ghost of Lincoln behind Mary Todd, of course, taken by Mumler.
Yep.
So, um,
And that's
considered
in
to
the
be
book.
considered to be a fraud, but Lincoln fascinated people and was very much a sort of the ghostly mascot during the post-Civil War era, like during Reconstruction. So he comes forward though. And then he starts making predictions. And and you include some of these communications in The Talking Dead. Any that really sat with you that you're like, okay, this maybe there is something uncanny here.
Yeah, he did predict World War One in 1917, which was interesting. So I thought that was kind of a cool one. I liked his he was very forgiving in the afterlife. That was one of the first questions people asked him was, "How do you feel about John Wilkes Booth, and did you meet him?" And he basically says like, "Oh, we're all brothers up here, even the Booths." So he kind of forget, he doesn't actually use the word forgive, or the spirit doesn't use that word, but it feels like it's forgiveness on his part, which I thought was pretty interesting. Um, I do just because you brought up his wife, I do want to just back up a second because one thing I thought was really interesting about Lincoln and the whole spiritualism that was going on within the White House is, his wife used a few different mediums that would come in. And so one of the mediums, I wrote about this in Chasing Ghosts. I forgot the medium's name offhand, but he actually was friends with John Wilkes Booth. And so they apparently met one night, and Booth believed in spiritualism because his brother had died. So he was working with mediums to connect with his deceased brother. And I think they were having some drinks, and Booth tells this medium that what he's going to do to Link, he's going to assassinate the president. And so this medium goes to the White House, and because he's able to go, he's got
Hmm.
that invitation, and he lets Lincoln know like what's going to happen. And I think that, again, who knows exactly how this played out, but Lincoln's basically thinking, whatever, we've got you guys in here all the time talking about stuff. I know that people probably want me dead. That, I got a whole half of the country who's doesn't like me, So I don't think he was shocked by the idea of maybe someone would want to assassinate him. But the fact that maybe a medium actually did have real intel from an assassin, but maybe wasn't taken so seriously because of the fact that he was a medium, I
Hmm.
thought was pretty fascinating. Um, so just kind of a side note to Lincoln. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that he was the go-to guy even in the, this was what about some 45, 50 years later, was
Yeah.
still the go-to spirit in terms of elected leaders and in the government. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting that he called out World War One
Yeah.
essentially.
That was an entry where, I mean, look, I'm reading it with the historical perspective, right? But it's sort of like reading your horoscope, I guess, after the day has passed and be like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, that one actually, I was reading, I was like, okay, that dips into kind of close to the uncanny for me. That one felt weird to me.
Yeah.
Just as a quick side note to your side note, I mean, Lincoln did have dreams of his own death, if I correct. Like he kind of had these premonitions of his own death.
I don't know. I haven't heard that actually.
I
I mean, it
I,
wouldn't surprise
uh,
me, but
I seem to recall that he had had some dreams kind of foretelling his own death. So I was
mm.
just kind of curious how that lined up with the medium warning him. Maybe he, should have paid a little more attention. But
Yeah, maybe that planted the seed.
yeah. Uh, yeah, too soon to laugh. I don't know. I still need to see. I don't know if you've seen the what is it? The Oh Mary or the Poor Mary show on Broadway, the Mary Todd Lincoln show. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
I
No.
I want to check it out. It's supposed to be very funny, but I think it gets
Is it
into
about this sort of spiritualist side of her?
I understand that it gets into it a little bit.
Oh, cool.
But uh, so I want to throw out a question from David here who submitted, and you guys can post your questions. David asked whether or not you omitted certain discussions that you didn't really find um, credible, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, about the balance of taking the messages at face value. But what were some things where you're just like, in good conscience, I don't think I can include this one.
I don't recall anything really specifically like that where I thought like this just sounds like ridiculous. If anything, I just found some of them were maybe either not that interesting, um, or I showed you that book, The Next World Interview. There were some people in there that I just felt like no one would really even be aware of now. I think these
Hmm.
were maybe luminaries at the time, but have kind of been lost to, lost in obscurity in history. So I may have just sort of discarded some of those just based on them not being someone of any significance, um, at least anymore. Not to diminish what they did at in their time, but yeah, I wouldn't say that there was something I came across where I just thought it was absurd and discounted it because of that. I can't remember anything like that specifically.
There were these, you talked about, the Shakespeare supposedly writing Hamlet in heaven through spirit communication, um, and we have other examples. Poe has some included some poems, right,
Some
that
new
he wrote.
poems. Yep.
Yeah,
Posthumous poems.
and of course, Patience Worth is probably the most famous of the spirit novelists. I
Yeah.
forget how many books. Like Patience Worth
She
was
wrote
pretty prolific, right?
very prolific. Yeah. She also wrote through the Ouija board.
Right. That's
Around the, it's a lot of work, right? I
a
mean,
lot of work.
she wrote one of her books, I think was, 500 or 600 pages. I think in the end, she'd written like a million words. And this went on for decades, decades of writing. So yeah, very prolific. I think one of them was the big book, I think was the story of Jesus, if I remember correctly. And
Yeah.
she had this weird sort of accent that she was writing through, that was like a mixture of, I think like, you know, sh and I guess an accent from like the Ozarks region and then mixed with some sort of French or something. I forgot how to describe it. It's a little nutty.
I I almost feel like you could just taking the spiritual side out of her, spiritualist side out of it, and separating any belief. These are, if they are just wholesale manufacturing these things, these mediums, it's like you really would have been considered you could have had rock star status by writing this stuff on its own. Do you ever pause and just think about this? Like, wow, okay, these could just be full on good writers.
Yeah, I have, I do wonder about that kind of thing. Like clearly you're able to write pretty well because like I said, a lot of these things they sound good. It's not like they're bad, right? It's not like
Yeah.
they're complete junk or anything. So it does make you wonder how much of this was this anything, some sort of mental issues going on where they actually believed that what was happening was real, but then they were writing and it was their own imagination, but they believed it was coming from somewhere else. Like, was there a condition going on that we just don't know and we can't diagnose because they're long gone? But maybe there's something like that. Or did they feel that they would have better success at the time writing with this idea of coming through the Ouija board because of the popularity of spiritualism? And maybe they didn't think they were good enough on their own just to make their own name, so they were borrowing someone else's name and leveraging that. It's hard to say. It's just speculation, but it's funny because this might be a weird parallel, but I've kind of wondered the same thing about cover bands.
Hmm.
You'll go see a cover band who plays like I love the band Rush, and they're highly technical musicians, and you see these people playing their music. Like, if you can play Rush, why don't you go make your own music? You're clearly talented. So I've kind of wondered that sort of thing, but just in that aspect of culture.
Yeah, I didn't expect it to go into cover bands and Rush, but I think it's an interesting point. And I also don't want to dismiss all of these people outright. I mean, because I don't
Right.
know, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I think that there's got to be some strong level of shenanigans with some of these people. Maybe some were legit, but I also think there was some pretty some blatant ripoffs. I mean, the cover
Yeah.
band thing is also interesting because, like, yeah, when you have that technical skill, I mean, I guess, yeah, it's you could at least write songs in the that sound like Rush, if you have that skill set,
Inspired by as opposed to just doing exactly,
yeah.
or at least only doing exactly.
So, and guys, drop your questions in there. The I also want to talk about just curious publications. Uh, this is this is your company, your publishing house.
Yeah, this is something I started this actually during the pandemic in 2020. It was something I thought about doing for a while, which was republishing old, obscure books that were just lost into history, but were public domain. So could I bring them back? I go through, I design everything. I go line by line to make sure the copy and the text is all clean and do new covers. And so obviously this topic is one that I've spent a lot of time on. So I've done a bunch of books. This is one from I think 1918 or so called How to Speak with the Dead, a practical handbook, which I just love that subtitle. This is a pretty obscure one. I have the original of this downstairs. So a lot of these are books in my collection that, are hard to find or expensive to get, but this makes them much easier. This is another one from Conan Doyle,
Hmm.
The Case for Spirit Photography, a pretty rare book. Lots of great photos in here, though, spirit photos. Or you can see a couple of them on
Yeah.
the front and back cover.
Yeah.
And I did do, you mentioned this earlier, but I did his History of Spiritualism. That's Eva C on the cover, by the way, who's mentioned in here. So yeah, so to me, it's a way to bring back these books I find fascinating that are just not really accessible, and give them some new life.
Yeah. No, I love it. I don't know if I actually maybe I just forget like what your initial appeal was, what the draw was for you to get into this particular pursuit. Obviously, I know you've you wrote for Weird News as well, and you've talked about UFOs, extraterrestrials. But what was the ghosty side of it? What was the draw?
I don't remember anything specific how I got into this, to be honest. I've always kind of been fascinated by it since I was a kid. I wrote another book, came out 10 years ago, called The Embalmed Head of Oliver Cromwell, the memoir, which followed Cromwell's embalmed head, which traveled for 300 years around England, 1661 to 1960. And that gave me this vehicle to explore thoughts I'd always had while covering his actual story, exploring the idea of death and the afterlife. And when I was a kid, I used to wonder, and I kind of still do, is burial the wrong thing? Are we going in, 6 feet under in darkness in the box? And are we trapped there for eternity? And how horrible that would be. It just sounds terrifying to me. Are our spirits actually trapped there? Is there another thing we should be doing that none of us know because we don't have that access to
Hmm.
to that knowledge because we're still alive? So that kind of was a way to explore that notion in various ways. And then I just started because I love buying old weird books. I think I just started buying some of these books. Like I said, I just found them so fascinating, just the ideas that were inside them, the stories that were collected, the beliefs that were held within those pages, and some of the titles I just loved as well. So it just kind of got me going more and more. And usually what happens with me is when I get really fascinated by something, I just want to share it with people, and that ends up as a book or an article or some sort of writing I can do to share this fascination with other people.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's I think the researcher and journalist draw, just to share that info. And
Yeah.
also like I think in addition to the belief element of it, I'm always fascinated by it. It's so easy to look at 200 years ago or even much further and say, oh, they were all rubes and they were so easily convinced or were easily believing in this stuff because they lacked modern science and medicine and they're primitive. Not so. Even back, thousands of years, there were people that were like, man, I don't think really this stuff is going on. There were skeptics. I
Yeah.
find that fascinating as well. The non-belief that exists even in eras where it's easy to assume everybody was buying into it.
I think that's true, but one thing I'll add to that too is I find this whole era that of the modern spiritualist movement that we've been talking about really fascinating because at that time, like let's just say like more late 1800s,
Hmm.
there were so many things going on uh, that were very new and very magical. And if you
Sure.
take, for example, like the telephone, that was, if my memory serves me, around the 1870s, I think, something like that, give or take a decade. Doesn't matter. Point point is you had at this time voices were traveling through like invisible waves going from long distances, right? So suddenly people could hear someone that never was imaginable before, right? That's very magical to think that voice can travel that way. Photography, mid 1800s, that's very new, capturing these pictures. And of course, that leads to spirit photography and the idea that maybe the camera sees what we can't see. Radio waves, same kind of thing as telephone, right? All of a sudden, these sounds are coming through this box. And how is that happening? And then on top of that, we didn't even talk about the Mars section in The
Right.
Talking Dead, but there's a whole section of spirit medium talking about what life on Mars is like. And at that time, that medium was clearly very influenced by what was going on with a lot of very prominent scientific figures who believed very much so that there was intelligent life on Mars and that we could be communicating with the Martians and that they were far more advanced than we were, and we were probably too dumb to recognize the signals they were sending us. And this was, Nikola Tesla was a huge believer in that, and Marconi believed he was
Right.
contacted by Martians, and Percival Lowell, of course, was preaching this starting in the mid 1890s. So these were a lot of things going on. So when I look at that in that context, I don't find it as shocking to think that people would believe that these mediums were also another new wonder that we have discovered, about life. Like it doesn't seem that crazy to think that maybe that was also possible.
Hence, like these, psychical societies,
Yeah,
um,
it's a
Harry
new science.
Price's, the guys that were looking at this, saying that they're approaching it with a skeptical mind or a scientific mindset.
Yeah, right.
Um, no, yeah,
It
and
seems
that,
reasonable in that sense.
yeah, yeah. Uh, we have David actually has another question. He says, you go through the 1920s and the Talking Dead, but have you looked further into more recent spirit conversations? And is this anything that you would consider for a follow-up?
That's a good question. Only a little bit, not too much to be honest. I mean, I'm kind of aware of some of the things that, more recent years, but for some reason, I'm just drawn more towards the historical time of all this. That this particular era fascinates me much more than the modern era. Can't give you a good reason for why. Maybe that will change over the years, but that's just kind of where I've just found my fascination lies is more this Victorian turn of the century era.
Yeah, for me, I think it's the fascinating. I'm specifically thinking about, like, let's say Bram Stoker, and I'm a big fan of Dracula, and this story that's set in the nexus of, like, what you were saying, of like old world belief as well as superstition, and then sort of science and men of learning and applying medical knowledge overlapping with those
Yeah.
old superstitions and everything. It's just something sort of that time, that world in not total transition, but yeah, new things meeting the old ways. I mean, hell, even just the Titanic, um, that we have this, you know, transatlantic ship taking place at the same time that we're also having, Marconi wires along the seabed, but also people still attending seances and things.
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
um, I think that's fascinating. I mean, it's also I mean, we reach a certain point where it's not that things degrade, but maybe do you find that it's just also harder to keep tabs on, like, a through line because of the emergence of more media, but also, um, I don't know, it seems like things kind of break down. It's a little bit harder to get to wrap your arms around, I have found.
I think that's true, but I will add, this is a new book I have coming out next month, the Malobservation Report, and this was written by two researchers, Richard Hodgson and Samuel J. Davy, 1887 and 1892, and they held these seances, and Davy was a magician, and they were faking everything, and they were interviewing people afterward to see what they remembered, and they remembered all these things that didn't actually happen. And so it's kind of a study in just how the brain takes in information, how it's perceived, how it's then sort of translated and comes back through memory. Obviously, malobservation is describing that. Um, but those things, this was 1887, as I said, but those things hold true even now. So the forward is written by, this is actually one of the first authors I've taken on with Curious, but he's Dr. Matthew L. Tompkins. He's a psychologist and magician. He teaches in Lund University in Sweden. And he basically talks about how the techniques that they were doing then still apply now. And he performs those same kinds of techniques through modern technology. So he's using the same sort of psychological tricks, and but he can do those through like a Zoom chat like we're doing, and he did this with me just to show how the same kinds of things still work even now. So in a sense, the things that were happening then can still happen today. There's just a different spin or different twist on it based on what we know, what we have access to, and the technology of today, and what we think. And but the root of all those things are still kind of similar in terms of how the brain works and how we perceive things, and maybe conclusions we maybe jump to or assumptions that we just make.
Have you I don't know if this is too much of a tangent, but I think with some of these people that I've heard about from this era that it's almost like it's dipping into comic book nerd territory here, but like it's almost like sometimes you feel like you're reading about people that it's not ghosts or the other side, but it's like almost superpowers, like weird abilities that people have tapped into. I mean, the I'm thinking, are you familiar with Washington Irving Bishop?
Yeah,
They, this guy sounds wild to me because he never presented himself as a medium, but he said, I'm just very good at reading people. And, he could hold someone's hand and walk around a theater and find a coin hidden, an object
yeah.
hidden in this theater. Or I think even like drove that way, right? Like he could,
I
uh,
I did that with the Amazing Kreskin. He
did
led me
you?
around a theater in a presentation to find, I forgot what it was now, but whatever we were finding, he was like me and another someone else from the audience basically holding our hands and walking around, and here it is, and uh, those people are amazing. And there's people like that, like Darren Brown. I don't know if you've seen him from the
Yeah.
UK, or Oz Perelman, who's kind of blowing up right now. He's phenomenal. And I think what you're saying, I mean, this is something interesting. I know I don't want to sound like I don't think any of this stuff is possible or true. I do think that there's something there. And uh, for my next book with Quirk Books that's coming out, which is called Exploding Cigars and Psychic Spies, the Psychic Spies refers to the chapter on remote viewing. The remote viewing project that the government, was
Mhm.
doing for 20 years. And so I spoke with, Uri Geller and Russell Targ, um, Paul H. Smith, who was in the army doing this remote viewing, and I took a class with Paul H. Smith at the Ryan Education Center. They do online
Yeah.
classes, and in this 4-week class, I have to say, like, that was the weirdest experience I've had in this sort of world of the unusual and the paranormal. I haven't seen a ghost, I haven't seen a UFO, but I find it all fascinating. But I had a remote viewing experience that freaked me out. Like I really can't explain it. I understand the idea of self-deception, like, oh yeah, that's, you want to believe that what you see is lining up with what you drew. But what I drew was so specific, and where he was, this basically was called a beacon remote viewing task, where he was somewhere in Utah, and we had to draw this place, and I drew these columns with a dome structure sitting on top of these columns, and he was at this place called the Centurium in like Utah State University or something like that, which was a dome structure sitting on top of columns. And I mean, really, that freaked me out. And I talked to another physicist who was very much involved in this from the early 70s. He's actually coined the name Stargate, which was the project name that the government was, or the most known, I'd say, name for the government's remote viewing project. And he talked about, as a physicist, how he thought this could be possible. Obviously, no proof. It's all theoretical. But he talked about quantum entanglement and the idea of information just being accessible if we can get aligned to it. And it made me think, like, having had that experience, is there something to it? And is that idea a way to explain all these different things? So if there were psychics who were doing things that are hard to imagine, are they somehow tapping into something, some knowledge bank out there that they found a line to, whether they understand it or not? Do we all have this capability, but most of us block it out? I don't know. I find it fascinating that maybe this is some sort of thing that is possible, that it could explain a lot of the unusual experiences people have.
Oh, I think so. I do think there's a bigger picture out there. And I have I believe a finely tuned BS meter, and I exercise skepticism, but I am not a cynic. I'm so I do think there's a lot of stuff going on out there, but I'm also case by case.
Yeah.
I look at some of these accounts from, let's say, the mediums from the Talking Dead, and I'm like, maybe, but also maybe you're just like really fanciful writer, and you're
Yeah.
conveying your own message that you need to be. People are going to more likely to listen to that message coming from the mouth of George Washington as opposed to you, the medium.
Yes, exactly.
It's a
Yeah.
convenient hat to wear.
Yeah.
So yeah. What was for the remote viewing? Are you going to do it again?
I've considered it. I did the class, I had the experience, I was able to write about that experience obviously for the book um and then I just, I got busy with the book, so I didn't spend time doing more remote viewing in this at the same time. But I'm kind of curious, about is it something worth pursuing more and seeing if this is like anything else. This was what Paul H. Smith was describing, was by that last class, he wasn't surprised that more people were doing better. He's like, it's like anything. The more you practice, the better you get at it, and you just have to keep doing it, which, that's logical, right? So if there is something there, then you have to keep doing it to get better at that thing that's out there. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe as the book draws closer, I'll get back into it.
I mean, as someone that's spent a lot of my career writing, and yet I don't like writing, but I love having written, I guess. But I'll be okay. I wish I could develop the ability of like automatic writing or psychography,
Right.
something else, Jesus, take the wheel, literally,
Yeah.
take the pen, and write for me. So, but what's the name of the next Quirk book, and when is that coming out?
It's called Exploding Cigars and Psychic Spies. And so it's a history of all different secret government projects. And that means things that actually happened or were uh, in the works to happen, but not conspiracy stuff. This is like actual stuff that was
Sure.
really going on within the government, CIA, FBI, and it's fascinating. A lot of fun stuff. It's due out now January 12th, 27.
Okay. All right. Well,
Bit of a wait, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fascinating stories in that book.
I like a good tease, that gives us
Yeah.
enough advance notice. And before I let you go, I mean we've got the Talking Dead, and you already mentioned it, but what else is coming up from Curious Publications?
Right now, this is the next book, Malobservation Report. Um, we'll see after that. I kind of just find things and I suddenly feel the need to put them out. So that'll happen, I'm sure, again soon. But for now, this one's been in the works for a while, so I'm pretty excited about that. I think it's a pretty fascinating study. And as I mentioned, Matt Tompkins gives a pretty incredible forward. It's a pretty lengthy forward just about how the mind works and how malobservation works and how this can be applied even today.
Right on. Well,
So that's January 15th,
okay.
26. Yep.
My guest has been Marc Hartzman, and the book is The Talking Dead Collection of Messages from Beyond the Veil, 1850s and 1920s. You can pick it up via Curious Publications at curiouspublications.com, as well as other books over at Curious Publications. And Mark, yeah, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back on. It's great to be here again.
I'm Aaron Sagers. This has been Talking Strange. Until next time, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.